This morning at 9:15, we had our beginning of the faith formation sessions, classes. How many people from faith formation are here? Is that all? Anyways, I had a story that's sort of to kick off, if you will, the school year, and particularly the faith formation year. It seems a Sunday school teacher was discussing the 10 Commandments with her 5- and 6-year-olds. After explaining the commandment to honor thy father and thy mother, she asked the class, "Is there a commandment that teaches us how to treat our brothers and sisters?" And from the back of the room, a little boy who was the eldest in his family said to the teacher, "The answer is, thou shalt not kill." I think we know that Jesus told a lot of stories. They call them parables. Because Jesus used the stories because he wanted his people of the day, and us, the people of today, to live lives that reflect the life of a believer, the life of a person of God, the life of a disciple of Jesus. One author who speaks of the parables says this. He says, Jesus did not tell parables, he did not tell stories as comforting bedtime stories. These stories by Jesus were meant to wake us up and to give us a new, a different perspective. And the same person goes on to say, the first sign that you're hearing the message of Jesus is when it makes us uncomfortable. And just maybe some of what we hear today, and maybe the ending of the gospel today, might make us a little uncomfortable, a little defensive. No servant can serve two masters. They will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot give yourself to God and mammon. What's that mammon stuff, Father? What is that? Well, the definition that's usually used for that word is wealth that's regarded as an evil influence or a false object of worship or devotion. Remember the story I told a couple of weeks ago about the Martian? In case you're on vacation, let me tell the story again. A Martian came to Earth to bring back an earthling, at least one, back to his leaders on Mars. But when he returned, he reported to his leaders that he had failed in bringing back an earthling. But he did something even better than that. He brought back two of their gods. And what he brought back was a television and a smartphone. This morning, I was up real early. I flipped on the TV, and I was watching a little bit of what was going on at Northway Church. And Pastor Buddy, I think it is, he was talking about really the not so positive influence of technology and our phones in our lives. He told the story of being at the Grand Canyon, and there was a family that also came to look at this beauty of God and beauty of nature. But there was a couple of people there, young people, all the time with their head down, with their eyes on their Game Boys and whatever game they were playing on their phone. And he said, what a shame that they're missing this. We're missing this. You know, it's all about balance. It's about perspective. The question today is, do we live for Christ or do we live for the world? And so, sure, we say, we live for Christ. But does it improve as time goes on that Christ is more and more, central, if you will, to my life and is a guiding principle in my life? Or do we live for Christ just when it suits us? When it's the right time for me? When it fits the schedule that I put up? I always remember, and I don't want to be overly critical, but he was a reader at Mass, and the only time when it wasn't golf season. Hey, Fred, you can still play golf. Play with me at one. He was better than me, so he probably didn't want to play with me. But, when we live for Christ, we recognize that God is God. That God is God. That I'm not God. I'm not God. Father, we live for Christ. Hey, we go to church. We go to communion every week. Say our prayers. Keep the commandments best we can. Live the Beatitudes, corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Father, hey. And the response to that is, that's very good, grasshopper. Some of you just don't get that comment. But that goes back a while. But we can make better choices as the days of our lives go on. Choices that maybe are challenging to us to live Christ. But it's our call by our God. Here we are. We go to a meeting. We're here at church, huh? And here we are at church. I said this to a group of family members a week ago. I said, you go to church. Church is boring. Well, it's a two-way street here. I do my job. You could do better, Father. Well, thank you. But the congregation needs to do its job. I put a thing in the bulletin. I think it's in this week's bulletin. Every week we give the notations of the scriptures for next weekend. And I put a little note that says, you want to get something more out of Mass? Maybe on Monday you read the first reading for next Sunday. Maybe on Wednesday you read the second reading for next weekend. And on Friday you read the gospel from next weekend. They're all there. And my point is that when you come to church and then hear them again, they might make a little bit more sense to you. And what the priest says, you might maybe see a little link to what was said by the gospel. What's the link? When we come to church, do we say, I said this to somebody in the lobby, here you are at church. The one thing you got to ask God for, among other things we could ask God for, is, God, Jesus, let me hear what I need to hear today while I'm in church for the next 55 minutes. God has something to say to us. I had two people walk out of church at the 8 o'clock Mass and said, Father, I needed to hear what you said. Okay. But there has to be an openness there. Or the opposite is, well, we start to zone out. I got other things to do. Oh, excuse me. I got my phone down here. I'm taking a little sneaky look at it, you know? Oh, God, did you see that? Notre Dame lost last night. When we're around our family and our friends, even strangers, is our behavior that of a person of integrity, of values, of honor, of faith, respect? Or is our life at times something we don't want our mother to know about? And that means any of us and all of us. There was a priest that I knew, before Masses, he'd go around church and say hi to people. And he'd go up to collegians, because there was a lot of colleges in the area. And he'd say to them, "Does your mother know you're here today?" And he meant it in a funny way, but also a good way. You know, as I was writing this, I started to come up with this third thought. You know, is our life about helping others? Or is our life, all about me, all about what I want, all about making my life comfortable? And just as I wrote that, I heard a little ping on my phone. I guess that's a text message, huh? Right? Right? What do I know about this? I don't know anything, I'm just an old priest, So I looked at my phone, and it was a text from a young man who I ran into, in a sense, a couple weeks ago when I was on vacation in Myrtle Beach. And I may have told the story, but it's worth retelling because, again, I can repeat myself. I am the pastor. And we were at this meeting. It was not a meeting. It was just a 19th hole type of thing. And he came up to me, and I knew he was looking at me. And before I could say anything to him, he said to me like this, "Father Joe?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Who are you?" He says, "Derek," and he gave me his last name. And I said to him, "I remember you." I said, "The last time we saw each other was about 14 or 15 years ago." And that situation went back to a couple of Sundays in the afternoon when I would leave, after Masses, go and play golf at the golf course I belonged to. And he and his father were always playing at that time, about 1 o'clock or so. And so I would play with him. I didn't play with him a lot, maybe 5 times during the summer. And the kid was a pretty good golfer at age 13. So much so that he played in the men's club championship. And that, if you don't know golf, there's a thing called stroke play and a thing called match play. And so they were playing match play that year, which is you against another person, a bracketed thing. You win, you go on, you lose, have a nice night. And so he won his first 2 matches. Pretty good, especially for a 13-year-old. And he then, about a couple of weeks later, a month later, he went down south to Florida someplace to go to school. This is high school. And to go to a golf school because he wanted to be a professional golfer sometime down the road. But here he is, 15 years later. I didn't recognize him. He's an adult now. He's not a teen anymore. And we talked a little bit about what he was doing. He's out of the golf business, never got into it. 3 handicap though, pretty good. But I said to him, "It was so nice of you to stop." I said, because I could not have been Father Joe. But it didn't matter. He wanted to say hello. And when I got back home here a couple weeks ago, I wrote him a letter. You know what a letter is? And then to my letter, he texted me, which is okay too. And it got me thinking, how many people can we bring just a little bit of respect or joy or whatever to any moment of the day? By hello, by a kind word, by an act of kindness, small as we think it is. Doing this each and every day, opportunities there. It seems to me that this is the thing of people of faith. This is the thing of people who are living for Christ. And again, as I said at the beginning of Mass, we live in the world, but there are things in the world sometimes that, want to pull us away from important things, like family, like faith, like growing in integrity, These things want to draw us away. And so maybe one of the questions that needs to be on our minds on a regular basis is very simply, as a person of faith, how can I, how will each of us individually live for Christ today and live for Christ tomorrow and live for Christ every day a bit more than days past?